Assessors must be able to conduct assessments. This lesson provides guidance to assessors about conducting assessments. Assessment is a quality assurance process, and in order to have quality at the end, we must have quality in the conducting of the assessment. When conducting assessments, the assessor must ensure the assessment is valid. That means the assessor must conduct an assessment that accurately measures the job-critical knowledge, skills, and abilities required for proficient job performance. Assessment is the process of collecting evidence and making judgments on whether competency has been achieved. The purpose of assessment is to confirm that an individual can perform to the standard expected in the workplace as expressed in the relevant industry competency standards. The questions considered by the assessor when conducting the assessment should include: will the assessment be conducted under realistic working conditions that adequately assess the candidate's abilities to perform his or her duties on the job? Will the candidate be required to demonstrate the skills and knowledge that are identified in the assessment as critical to proficiency? Will the candidate be required to rely on his or her own skills and knowledge? Assessors have to consider the humanity of the candidate. Effort, and sometimes sacrifice, are required for achievement. A candidate who is still a secondary school student, he will likely be doing a Level 1 or Level 2 assessment. If the candidate is an experienced worker, he will likely be doing a Level 3, 4, or Level 5 assessment. If either of these candidates is nervous, then he isn't properly prepared. CBT is not academia, where the candidate does not know what question will be asked. Academic students have to study, retain, and reproduce a wide range of information. Sometimes they do not study a particular topic, and there are questions on those topics. So there can be surprises, and academics can be nervous about that. Vocational students have to demonstrate named skills and apply their knowledge, and there are no surprises. The candidate's training should have included enough practice of these tasks, and an instructor should have deemed the candidate ready for assessment. Quickly adding that candidates should be trained to proficiently perform their job, rather than to just successfully complete an assessment. Always conduct assessments suitable for the level of the vocational qualification. Assessors have to consider the types of workers needed to improve the contribution of the industry to the economy of the country. Assessors have to consider the types of workers needed to improve productivity and efficiency in the country. Unrepaired machines, poorly operated machines, shoddy workmanship, low productivity, and lost time accidents are the products of bad or no assessments. When you are conducting a practical demonstration assessment, your main focus should be on observing the candidate. The second priority is to record evidence. So now it's crunch time and we're conducting the assessment. The circumstances of evidence gathering vary widely. But the evidence to be gathered is what is stated on the dimensions of competency, and the methods for collecting evidence will be those stated on the assessment. The assessor records the evidence on the practical assessment, assessor only, checklist and transfers them to the observation checklist at the candidate debrief. A general checklist for observing the candidate's performance should include: if a safety violation occurs, terminate the assessment immediately. Ensure that the candidate can concentrate on the task at hand. Do not allow other workers to interfere with the assessment. Ensure realistic assessment conditions with a normal working environment. The first part of the actual assessment process is to observe the candidate's performance during the assessment. Remember that you must continuously observe the candidate. Throughout the assessment, make the candidate keep to the assessment procedures. There could be times during the assessment when the assessor will need to ask the candidate what he is doing. The assessor should try to limit the questions during the candidate's performance, and minimize any coaching the candidate receives. Typically, an assessment will include a number of questions regarding the candidate's knowledge of rules and procedures pertaining to the duties under assessment. In addition, there will commonly be a number of questions regarding the candidate's performance that must be asked for clarification. Generally, a good time to ask all of these questions is following the candidate's demonstration of practical skills. At this point, the assessor can ask specific questions about the observed performance, and use these questions as introductions, when appropriate, to more general questions about knowledge and rules included as part of the assessment. Avoid allowing waiting candidates to observe assessments of candidates being assessed. This will give the waiting group an unfair advantage during subsequent assessments. Specific assessment objectives, performance measures, performance standards, and scoring procedures will be included in each assessment at the design stage. The assessor's consistent application of these procedures will ensure that you conduct a valid and reliable assessment. However, sticking to these procedures may require some flexibility from the assessor. In some cases, you may be required to remember the performance of the candidate for some time before you are able to record and score his performance. Candidates should be assessed on their ability to perform their job tasks and duties and to demonstrate their knowledge of job procedures and rules. This is to maintain assessment validity and reliability. A checklist for observing the candidate's performance should include continuously observing the candidate during the assessment, recording the observed performance and applying the performance standards during the assessment, requiring that standard procedures be adhered to, except when assessment procedures require demonstration of knowledge or skill different from these procedures. The checklist should also include avoid asking leading questions. Try to keep the questions fair but general in nature. Avoid giving the candidate unsolicited assistance, but respond to appropriate questions and provide appropriate equipment when required. Remain objective and maintain positive control of the operation at all times. Another reminder, it is important to remain constantly vigilant regarding operational effectiveness and safety. Assessments should be conducted only where they do not adversely affect the normal operations in the area. Assessments must be terminated whenever safety conditions are being violated. The next step in the assessment process is to determine the assessment outcome. To do this, record the candidate's performance on each assessment worksheet and then apply the scoring procedures specified in the assessment procedures. Remember that if the candidate incorrectly performs any of the critical, required actions, he automatically fails the entire assessment. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to prepare a practical assessment, assessor-only, checklist and observation checklist for your assessment and use them, for real, in your mock assessment. Next comes determining and documenting the outcome of the assessment. You will have to transfer the final results to the final assessment record sheet eventually. A checklist for determining outcome should include record performance on the appropriate assessment worksheet. Strictly adhere to the prescribed performance standards and scoring procedure. Determine and document the outcome of the assessment, then transfer the final results to the final assessment record sheet. Confirm the successful demonstration of tasks in the task book or other record, as appropriate. Let's talk about debriefing the candidate. A checklist for debriefing the candidate should include debrief the candidate as soon as possible after the assessment. Restate the assessment objectives. Focus on positive accomplishments first. Identify areas needing improvement. If the candidate failed to demonstrate proficiency, jointly develop an improvement plan to prepare for reassessment. If the candidate failed to demonstrate proficiency, the assessor can work together with him to develop an improvement plan to prepare for reassessment. Conditions for conducting the reassessment should be specified in the assessment procedure. Specific issues to consider are the period between initial assessment and reassessment, and any changes in the performance standards and scoring procedures that could be adopted for the reassessment. The summary record sheet is a checklist to confirm that all aspects of the assessment process have been completed and reviewed as required. A summary record sheet should be completed for each candidate. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to use a summary record sheet at a debriefing and the candidate must complete and sign their sections. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to conduct an oral assessment with your candidate and record the result. Please use your own conditions for doing your own oral assessment to inform how flexible you can be when you conduct the oral assessment with your candidate. Remember that in the real world, candidates should be assessed on their ability to perform their job tasks and duties and to demonstrate their knowledge of job procedures and rules. Alternatively, you can practice embedding some oral questions in the practical assessment, assessor-only, checklist, for an additional challenge. This is an example of a practical assessment, assessor-only, checklist for a small boat operator checking his outboard engine before departure. On this one, the candidate has to check the fuel system from the engine and then answer an oral question about how much fuel they would take for the trip. The answer is provided. Remember to follow the guidelines for talking to the candidate. And ensure that the grading system appropriately covers the practical tasks as well as the oral questions. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to conduct a written assessment with your candidate and record the result. Please use your own conditions for doing your own written assessment to inform how flexible you can be when you conduct the written assessment with your candidate. Remember that in the real world, candidates should be assessed on their ability to perform their job tasks and duties and to demonstrate their knowledge of job procedures and rules. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to enter the candidate's results on the final assessment record sheet for the units attempted only. You are required to complete the details at the top to the best of your knowledge. You will probably have some additional paperwork requirements that have been specified by your organization. This will likely involve the maintenance of records within your organization. In addition, upon successful completion of an assessment by a candidate, you will need to make the appropriate entries in any training record book that has been adopted by the organization. If you have more than a few students, you'll still have to produce high-quality assessment files for each of them because any candidate can be externally verified. Formative assessments are used to monitor student learning to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. More specifically, formative assessments help students identify their strengths and weaknesses and target areas that need work. There is no grade awarded.